In spring of 1992, I was on a bus at night heading to Parris Island, South Carolina. And man, I was 18 years old. I had lived with my mom and stepdad for most of my life, and then lived with my grandmother for one semester of college, community college, and I was ready for something else, just ready for a change, and so a challenge, really, if I was to be honest. And so I'm on this bus, and we get there. I'm sure you've heard the stories of this. The bus pulls up, and this drill instructor gets on there, and he's, "Get off my bus now," and it's chaos, and everybody's running around. And you got these yellow footprints there on the road, and you line up in the yellow footprints as a platoon would line up, and you're standing there, and they're just stressing you out as you're there. You're getting yelled at from all directions, and it's chaotic. And so it's late at night when you arrive, right? I grew up in West Tennessee, and so sometime early in that day, I got on a Greyhound bus. They gave me a ticket to a Greyhound bus and drove me to Memphis, got on an airplane from Memphis, ended up in Charleston, and then I met a bunch of people there I'd never seen before. And then you get on these buses to take you to Parris Island from there. And so it's been a long day of travel as it is. And you get off that bus, and now it's wild. And the first few hours is through the night, and you're doing a lot of paperwork and processing and all this, and then you go to the doctor where you get a physical, and then they line you up along these long walls, and you got this big plastic tub, and they're just literally throwing uniforms and boots and toothbrushes and all this stuff at you, essentially bouncing off of you into your tub, and you're just like the whole time, and that's all night long. You do that, it takes hours to go through. And so at some point, the sun comes up, and it's tomorrow now, and you haven't slept, and it's been a stressful night. And at some point during that day, you go into a barbershop that is not like any barbershop you've ever seen. There's about 5 chairs here, and you go in one side of the thing, and you go in the empty chair, and I never knew before then that a haircut could be painful, that it would hurt. Then I got a haircut that hurt, and I got up and had no hair on my head, as close as the clippers would get you. And then you go out the door on the other end. And so I walk out the door, and you're in a hallway, and I turned to my left, and there's a drill instructor there. There's different processes you go through when you go to boot camp. There's receiving, which is what this was, and you're there for a few days. Then you go to a thing called forming, which they just kind of teach you where things are. And then the training starts. So you've been there 2 weeks where you even really start training. And training's 13 weeks, and so this is the first day. So I walk out in that hallway, and I turn to my left, and this man, large man, punches me in the face with a gas mask and yells, "Medium." And so that's the moment that I started to think, I've made a mistake here. I may not want to do this. But the thing is, and that didn't go away right away, right? You kind of like, man, I signed up for this. This is what I wanted, I guess. And so here we are. And so you go through the whole day. And finally, at the end of that day, you got all your stuff they've given you, and you've been through this whole thing, and you've been yelled at the whole time, and you finally get a few minutes to square your gear away and put your bed together and take a shower or whatever. And I'm looking around this room, and I'm 18, and these guys look like grown men to me. I'm like, where am I? What is going on here? And what I'm thinking is, as we're talking a little bit, and you're kind of low, you're not really talking too loud, but you're talking to people. And I'm thinking in my head, why is nobody talking about getting punched in the face with that gas mask? Because that was the thing that I remember the whole day. It's like, why do you do that? And nobody mentioned it. It was like, that was just okay. Like, this is part of it. And what I take away from that, as you're going through your training, is that was really hard. But there's a tomorrow that's also going to be hard. And there's another day that's going to be hard. And that never really stops the whole time you're going through this stuff. And the hard stuff you went through that first day, you kind of forget about it as you go through, because what you're doing right now is really hard as well. And that's when I really started to build this thing that wherever I am today, right? In high school, and through school, home life was kind of chaotic for me. And so my grades weren't great, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know where I was going. And a lot of my friends went off to four-year colleges and all these other things, and my life wasn't like their life. And I'm starting to try to figure out, okay, how do I navigate through this stuff? And what I learned in the Marine Corps specifically was how to hold yourself accountable, right? If you want this done, if you want to achieve something, it's on you. Now, you need these people around you, but you got to play your part. You got to be part of this team. You got to do the things you're expected to do. And so I start to figure some of those things out, right? How to be where I'm supposed to be when I'm supposed to be there. And just hold yourself to a certain standard. And when I think back about my Marine Corps time, it was 8 years, assigned to 6 and 2, so that's what they called it, right? 6 years active, 2 inactive in the reserve. So I did about 10 months of training. Then I went back to my life in Tennessee and went to reserve duty once a month, 2 weeks out of the year for the most part. And it was 91 to 99, right? I was in high school during Desert Storm, and seeing what happened to those guys, and I talked to a gentleman right here who was there, seeing what happened to those men and women who were part of that and how they came home. And our society treated them in a way that I've never seen in my lifetime veterans be treated. Because growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was not a great time for veterans in this country. Post-Vietnam was difficult. I talked to General Bill Raines a few years ago. He's behind the Range Group here in town and a big part of the Medal of Honor Heritage Center. And he was telling me about his service. And he was an officer in Vietnam. And said when he came home, they threw rotten eggs at him. And he was told, don't wear your uniform, like by his unit, by his superiors. Don't wear a uniform in public. And he didn't from the 60s when he came home to Desert Storm, he didn't do it. And that was the first time that he ever had a situation where someone treated him like they appreciated his service. And all that time, he got deployed, got the information, took some stuff to the dry cleaners, went to pick it up, and on the bag, there's a little slip and it said, no charge, thank you. And that was the first time in 20-some-odd years he had heard that. And so what we do on The Price of Freedom is we want to create a place where it's always okay to talk about your service, because your service matters. And that's something that we strive to do, is create that. And that can be on camera, off camera. Anybody you know who served, who wants to just sit down and talk about it, we can go to Hardee's and get a biscuit. We can sit on a park bench. I don't care. Or we can do it in your living room. We can put it on TV. We can do it however you want to do it. It's not always about telling the story for television. It's about understanding who our veterans are and what they're all about. It's such a small percentage of our society who actually serves, and what makes them do that? What makes them want to take because at this point, since Vietnam, it's all been all volunteer. So everybody who goes makes that decision to go. And so that's part of what we're trying to do with this series. And I was working in Knoxville in a TV station there in 2006. So let me back up a little bit, right? So I get out of the Marine Corps, dropped to the inactive reserve in 97, and then got out completely in 99. And then 2 years after that was 9/11, right? So I've been really out of the military for 4 years at that point. And I had four years into this career, and it was really hard because I knew I was young enough and healthy enough to go and help. And it was a hard decision to not do that. But I was being pulled, in my mind, to do what I'm doing today. And I'm one that believes, and I think a lot of people believe, the decisions you make and the places you end up are for a reason. And I believe that all that stuff led to this, to where I am today. Because I feel like that what I've done here in Chattanooga the last 10 years with The Price of Freedom is an extension of my service. I'm not serving. People have accused me over the years of being pro-war, and that's not it. people accuse me to be a pro-military. That's not really it. I'm pro-veteran. I want to understand the veterans. I understand the people who are serving currently and who have served and what that's about and why you do that. And so through all that, it's been an amazing experience here the last decade of getting a chance to tell some of these folks' stories. And more than anything, I feel selfish in some ways because it's been educational for me, and it's hard to put into words just how special it's been to do this and meet these people and sit across from them and hear their stories. And many of them are not here anymore. Talk about Ralph Painter and George Palmer, people that I had a chance to sit down with for a few hours or maybe an hour and them just tell me what that was like, what their life was like, what they saw, what they experienced. And that was important, you know, to tell those stories and do that. And so now, where we are, I get a chance, and this has grown through the years, to do this, come out and talk to groups and talk to people about military service and the price of freedom and what we're doing a few times a year. Veterans Day is obviously one that sticks out, Memorial Day, and then other times of the year as well. And so I cherish these times too, because when you're in a TV studio telling it, there's only like 3 people in there, and they've heard all my stories, and they know all the stuff. And so being here with you is really special because I feel like that I get a chance to really kind of explain kind of more than just that 2-minute segment you saw on the news, because there's so much more to these stories than just that. We pick out the highlights and the things that we think people need to understand, but there's so much more to this. And so every time I do one of these talks, I try to not repeat myself, but in this year, I think I might, because every year I try to find the story that's been the most impactful to me or the one I think might impact somebody in somebody's life. And the one this year is Larry Taylor, Captain Larry Taylor. And if you don't know his story, he received the Medal of Honor on September 5th in Washington, D.C., and he lives on Signal Mountain. Grew up here. He's been Chattanooga most of his life except for his military service. Grew up St. Elmo and went to McCallie, went to UT in Knoxville, ROTC, and after his college career, when you go through that, you promise you're going to spend so much time in the Army, and the war was on then. Vietnam was on then, and so he gets sent over there. And through the years, I've had a chance to talk to him a lot. And as a journalist, that's a special thing, to not just ask the question once or twice and then move on. Go back more times and ask the same question maybe, and maybe hear the answer in a different way. And it's been interesting because I've learned so much from these conversations. And not just him, but there are people who I've met who were there with him, and there are people who I've met who worked on this project to help get him the Medal of Honor, and that was a project. And there's so many layers to it, and there's so many things to take away from it. I want to share some of that with you today. Like I said, he left UT and went full-time in the Army. And in August of '67 is when he was sent to Vietnam. So he did 1-year tour, August '67, August '68, right? And he gets there and he's flying. He was originally in the Armored Branch and decided he didn't want to do that. They moved him into flight school. And he started flying these B model Hueys, which were older model helicopters. And they were gunships is what they called them. And he said these things just didn't have any power at all. And so they were did not have the equipment they needed. And so, but the first several months he was there, that's what he flew on these missions. And so around March of '68, most people spend that entire year, if you're there, in combat. A month of that, he got sent to Benoit to go to flight school to fly these Cobras. And he talked about these Cobras like that. And when he flew that thing, he was like, this is living, right? This is like, I mean, you couldn't even describe it. I mean, We're in a church, but I'll go ahead and say what he said. He said it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on. That's what he said. Larry Taylor is hilarious. He's the toughest person I've probably ever met, and one of the funniest as well. And I'll try to share some of that during this talk as well. So for 11 months in that year, he was flying missions. And to put that into perspective, Marines in the South Pacific in World War II, right? To fight those battles, you're on some kind of boat and you're landing on an island, and you land and the fighting is really intense for a few days or a short period of time, and then when the battle's over, there's kind of a down period, right? And so on average, Marines in the South Pacific in World War II, they fought for about 40 days a year. If you were on the ground in Vietnam, you fought about 240 days a year. If you were a helicopter pilot, you flew 320 days a year on average. So these guys were every day in it, right? And their job, his job, what he did specifically was when somebody's on the ground in trouble, he gets the call and he goes in and he is air to ground fire support, right? So if some troops are they're pinned down in there, he shows up. And these things got a bunch of rockets and they called miniguns, and he's going in there, and it's war. It's full-on chaos, right? And that's what's happening. And so in that time, in that 11-month time, he earned 63 combat decorations. 43 air medals. We know the Medal of Honor now. 1 Bronze Star, 4 Distinguished Flying Crosses. 63 in 11 months is about 1.31 per week. So this man was in the thick of stuff a lot. And as he would say, and I'll clean this up, he hung his butt out every night, is what he said. And so, I mean, he was really in the thick of it. And what happens is, where your base camp is, there's a horn that would go off. And that is your alert. You got 2 minutes to get to your helicopter and get that off the ground. And he said he flew many missions in his skivvies and flip-flops because that thing went off and he was asleep or in the bathroom or something else because it was going off all the time. And so, but you have 2 minutes to do that. And when you're going into these missions, you don't have a lot of time to think about what you're about to do. And it's always dangerous. And he said there's a process of both focusing your mind on what you're about to do, to just your job, what do you got to do this, and then also kind of psyching yourself up that this is going to be hairy, right? And so that's what his life was like day in, day out during the war. And so on this night, the combat action that would eventually earn him the Medal of Honor, 55 years later, was June 18th, 1968, and they get the horn going off, and he had been flying, he was the first squadron to go through that Cobra flight school. So he was the first group of guys to fly these Cobras in Vietnam. And so, horn goes off, he and his co-pilot get in their helicopter, the Cobra, they call it a gunship. They start heading toward this battle. Typically, you've got one Cobra and a second Cobra that's your wingman, and then you have a Huey that comes with you as a transport, troop transport option. Well, about as soon as they leave the base, they realize that the comms, communications, the radios are out on the Huey. So the Huey's got to go back. So he doesn't have any kind of way to transport troops now. So now they're just in fighting mode. And there were 4 guys on the ground. 4, they called them LRRPs at the time. They call long-range reconnaissance. Now you'd call them an Army Ranger. But there were 4 guys, and their job on this night was supposed to be a 3-day mission. And they moved slow and tried to be quiet, and they were trying to observe a village, a place called Ap Go Cong in Vietnam. It's about less than 20 miles from Saigon at the time. It's now Ho Chi Minh City, but Saigon at the time. And so They're flying to this battle. These guys went in to observe. It's dusk, and so it's not dark yet, but it's starting to get dark. And they realize they're seeing silhouettes on both sides of them of people, and realize, okay, we've been spotted and we're surrounded, and this is a problem. And so they called in for the air support, saying, we've got a problem. And as soon as they start doing that, the battle started. And so these guys are getting lit up from a lot of different directions, and they're surrounded. And it's so close to this village, and this village has a company of enemy combatants, so to speak. And so they have an endless supply of people to join the fight against these 4 guys. And they are pinned down and they are trapped. And so Taylor, who was the ranking officer in this mission, and the wingman show up, and they just go to work, right? And it's rockets and it's minigun rounds, and they're flying over 1 pass, 2 passes. You know, they make a loop essentially, different directions, come out from other directions, and they're going at them. And it goes on for about 35 minutes, and they realize at this point that they don't have enough firepower to get these guys out. And the protocol is, when you start to run out of ammunition and fuel, you leave that fight, you go back to your base camp, and you refuel, and you reload, and you go back. And he knew, after seeing from the air what was going on there, that if he did that, these men were going to be captured or killed. And he was not willing to do that. So he comes up with a plan. He says, what we're going to do, we got about enough ammunition for 1 more real good blast. And we're going to try to, as it's in a ring, take out 1 part of that ring, or at least scare folks away from that part. Give them enough room to run. There's a river they're running toward. And give them enough space to kind of get out of the thick of that. At the same time, they're calling artillery. And some of the artillery catches part of the village on fire. So that distracts them a little bit. Now they're fighting the fire in the village and fighting these guys on the ground. That's enough of a deterrent to kind of give them a little bit of space. And then he tells these guys on the ground, who he's worked with in the past, right? He gets called every night, so he works with a lot of the same guys who are doing dangerous stuff. They're in trouble a lot. So he worked with these guys. Their call sign was Wildcat 2. And so he calls down to Wildcat 2 and says, what I want you to do is blast your claymores, which is a little explosive device they all had. Blast those things, create a diversion, run 100 yards toward that direction where they're going to blast that hole in that ring, and lay down in the grass. And they don't know what they're doing that for. They just know they've been told to do it, so they're going to do it because they're in trouble and not a lot of options at this point. So they do that, and as soon as they lay down, they feel the backdraft of Larry Taylor's Cobra landing. He almost lands on top of them. And he never told them what to do, but they just instinctively knew what to do. And 2 grab onto the struts and the skids on one side, and 2 jump on the empty rocket pods. There's a guy, Dave Hill, who's the one survivor today from that group, says he rode it backwards like a horse, got on the thing backwards, and he lifted these 4 men out of this battle, flew them away to a water treatment plant close to Saigon. They get off of the helicopter, step out, salute him, they go on with the war. He does the same thing. He was awarded a Silver Star for that. And a few days after that, it was such a big moment for those guys on the ground that they wanted to go find Larry Taylor. Had never met him face to face. He had come to their aid many times, but didn't know him. They wanted to go find him and thank him because he saved their lives. Both teams of Cobras saved their lives that night. But what Larry Taylor did specifically had never been done before in combat. And it was done other times, a version of that in combat with those Cobras, but not like that, not in that situation, in that much danger. He had 13 bullet holes in the side of his Cobra that night when he got back to the base camp. Saved 4 men's lives. I mean, that was it was the most extreme version of that, but versions of that happened later in the war. But that was the first time that had ever happened. So they wanted to go find him and thank him. Couldn't find him. And he's on another mission. They had to go back and do what they had to do. They were both toward the end of their tours. And so Larry Taylor finished his tour, goes to Germany for a while, comes back to Chattanooga, and he's lived here since the 70s. The other men do the same thing. One of the 4 men died in combat, but the 3 of the men come back home, start their lives. And so in 1999, Dave Hill, who's the one survivor of that group on the ground, he got a phone call, and it was from somebody he knew, Army Ranger he knew, and they said, we're going to have a reunion in Branson, Missouri. First time they ever had a reunion. It had been home for, since the late 60s. So 20 some odd years at that point, I guess. Yeah, no, 30 years at that point. And so they, on the phone, they said, and Larry Taylor's going to be there. And he was like, well, I can't miss this opportunity to go and talk to Larry Taylor. Something I've been wanting to do for a long time. So they go. 2 of the guys who were there on the ground that night were there, and Larry Taylor was there. And they start talking. And Dave says that's the first time he realized that Larry Taylor didn't get the Medal of Honor. He assumed he always had. I think 1999, internet's not like it is today where we just have it in our hands all the time, right? He didn't know. He never realized it. And he realized as well he had a Silver Star, but that's what they got for the same thing. He's like, how can I get the same medal that this guy got? And he saved our lives. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for this. He will tell you that they were either going to be captured or killed. And Larry Taylor will tell you that he never left a man on the ground, and he never had any of his pilots killed in action. And he'd be very proud of that. That's a big deal, because that's 68, right? This is the deadliest year of the war. Tet Offensive was January, 3 phases from January to September. So it was bad at that point. It was bad the whole time, but it was bad in that year more so than other times. And so they start just talking at that reunion, and they're telling the story. And that's when they talked to this man here. Gary Linderer wrote a book about missions, Phantom Warriors, about the Rangers and the Lurps and all this stuff. And it was told, this story's told in this book, and this was, the interviews for this book were done at that reunion in 1999. And so they just talked through the years of like every time they would meet up, boy, Larry should have got the Medal of Honor. Well, he should have got the Medal of Honor. And then they'd go on with their lives. And then a couple of years later, they started like, we need to do something about this. But they didn't know how. And so there was only 2 of them, of those Rangers that were going to these reunions. One had died in the war. One, they didn't know where he was. And so they start trying to figure this out. What's the process like? And they just start talking about it and trying to dig around, and they can't really figure it out and whatever. And so in 2017, Dave Hill gets serious about it. And he says he wrote a letter to Bob Corker thinking he didn't know where this was going to go, but he's going to write a letter. In Bob Corker's office, Chief of Staff Todd Womack, they assigned a staffer to this case. Stacy Willoughby is her name. And Dave Hill credits her for the first couple of years of this, of really, there's no like place to go, where do you get your Silver Star upgraded to the Medal of Honor? It's not like just something you go and figure out. Basically how they figured it out was just calling the Army and trying to find the right person to talk to, and they would help them a little bit, and they submitted a packet, and it got denied. And submitted a packet, and it got denied. And that was the first year of it. And so in 2018, I'm at a Vietnam Veterans of America meeting over in East Ridge. That's the first time I met Larry Taylor in 2018. And he and some friends were there, and they're looking for that one ranger they knew who was alive, but they didn't know where he was. His name was Gerald Patty. And so in that meeting, they're telling a little bit about his story and saying, we're trying to find this guy, Gerald Patty, because part of that process, they've learned at that point there were 2 things they had to have they didn't have. And the first one was 2 living eyewitnesses of what happened. They had one, they had Dave Hill. Bob Elsner, the other Ranger who was at the reunions, had since passed. So by 2018, it's just Dave Hill. He's the only one that is still living. that they know of. And they don't know where Gerald Patty is. And he's from Maryville, Tennessee, up in Blount County. And so they think maybe somebody knows this man. And so they needed that. And they also needed to account for all the people who were there that night. And so the only American troops that were there that night were the 4 men on the ground, Taylor, his co-pilot, and the two pilots in the other helicopter. Well, the two pilots in the other helicopter, they died in the war. And so Gerald Patty, Dave Hill, and Larry Taylor's co-pilot are the only options for the 2 men. So they went on this nationwide search for Gerald Patty, and it took them almost a year, and they figured out calling numbers. They've had some people named Gerald Patty in like New Jersey and these other places, and they're trying to track him down. And finally they figure out through finding his family that he had passed away in 2015. And so now they're down to 2 options. And so they believed that his co-pilot was still around somewhere, but they couldn't find him. And they found out through searching that he lived in Costa Rica. He was a commercial pilot when he came back from the war, and he was living in Costa Rica, and it's hard to find him. And so they knew that he was there, so they tried to contact him. And they couldn't get him. They couldn't get him. This went on for months. They couldn't get him. And so finally they find his son in Virginia, and so I can get in touch with him. So they get him. They finally get in touch with him. He goes, sure, I'll do a witness statement. And so he comes back to the States a couple months later, fills his witness statement out, and so, okay, great. So now it's like 2019 or so, and they think they've got all that they need, right? They put these packets together, and this was the packet they put together in 2019. I met Larry Taylor at that meeting in 2018, and when I heard the story, I went up to him and told him who I was, and I want to tell your story. That's fascinating. And he was all in. But the guys who were working on this with him, they were like, well, media coverage might hurt us. So can you do the interview and just hold on to it for a while? And I thought, this is a phenomenal story. Sure, I'll do that. What I didn't know is how long they were going to ask me to do that. Because it was 2018. We didn't air it until 2021. We don't hold stories for 3 years. That's not what we do. I didn't tell anybody. I just kind of squirreled it away. Nobody hurt my video. I need this. And they were in a hurry to do the interview because Larry had been fighting prostate cancer for 4 years. And by the time I asked him to do the interview, and we did the interview October 23rd, 2018, he had just been diagnosed with kidney cancer. And so he was going through some stuff. But they wanted, while he was as healthy as he was, to get this recorded. So I went to his house, 1 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, October 23rd, 2018, and we did an interview for 47 minutes and 40 seconds. And I will never forget it because I've watched it a lot. Way too much. Probably, if I told you the number, it would just feel weird. I've watched it a lot. And it's one of the most phenomenal experiences of my life. You're sitting across from this guy, who at that point wasn't a Medal of Honor recipient, but he had a phenomenal story. And I'm hearing it from the person who lived it, who did it. And it is incredible just to hear him explain it in detail and what he was thinking and why he did what he did and all those things. And so it was just one of those things that I just couldn't forget. And so we do the interview, and I'd see him, at events through the years and just say, hey, can we hear the story? And they were like, well, just wait. We're going to let you know and all this stuff. And okay. Well, so finally, right, so pandemic hits, everything stops, slows everything down, finally get things going again, and that's when they really started to get traction. It was 2021. It was like this whole stop and start, hitting roadblocks. They went to the Medal of Honor Heritage Center here in Chattanooga, and they had been talking with them for a while, but General Raines and some of the guys with that were busy raising money for that. And so they put this in front of General B.B. Bell. Now, General Bell lives here. He's a retired 4-star general. And if you know anything about 4-star generals, right, there's only been, I think, 9 people who've ever had a 5-star rank in the American military. And most of that was World War II, when we had our generals having to meet with other Allied forces generals, and they had 5-star ranks, and so our guys couldn't be outranked by their guys, so we gave some people 5-star ranks. But Omar Bradley was the last living general who had the 5-star rank, passed away in the 80s. Nobody's had it since then. So to be a 4-star general is a big deal. And so he got involved, and he looks at the packet that I just showed you, this here. And this has got like letters from Bob Corker and witness statements and parts of that book in it, and it's a pretty good deal here. And so they started with this. And when B.B. Bell got involved, they ended up with this. This is much more substantial and a lot more direct, and so you can tell the difference here. This is the one that finally got the thing done. What they realized, though, since B.B. Bell was a 4-star general, he'd been involved in awards a lot from what he had done. He knew the process as well as anybody, and he said the reason you're not getting any real traction is there's nothing in this packet that you've laid out that Taylor's command didn't have in '68 when they gave you the Silver Star. You got to prove that there's information they didn't have. And so they start talking and going through the whole thing and realize because of the war and where Dave Hill and his guys were and Larry Taylor's guys were, they never talked to anybody on the ground. So that was the thing. When they finally understood that they never talked to anybody on the ground, he had information that his command didn't have, that's what moved the ball rolling. And also having a 4-star general who people are going to call back when he calls and answer his emails, and having someone that really can make some things happen, that's really when things started going. And so that was 2021. And then finally, April of this year, I get a phone call. It was a Sunday. I was out for a run. I came back home, and I saw I had a missed call from one of those veterans who were working on it. And he said, Larry got a letter from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin saying it had passed through the Pentagon. He had signed it. It's on the president's desk. And essentially, this is going to happen. And so it was one of those things that was hard to believe when you heard it because they'd been working on it for so long. And I talked to these guys so many times. And now, as a journalist, I just get busy behind the scenes trying to put this stuff together so we're ready to go when we can announce something. And so the president calls him on a Saturday in July, and we had some stuff ready to go. So we aired that on Saturday and Sunday, and I went and talked to him on that Monday. And when you're asking these questions to someone you've talked to a lot, and you know the story in and out, and you feel like you're asking the same questions over and over again, and you're listening for anything that you don't know already. And some of those conversations were when I heard things that were like, man, now I understand this person a little bit better than I ever did. And he would talk about, going on these missions and knowing how dangerous they were and psyching himself up and going through that process. And during the mission, he's fine. And then he goes back to the base camp afterwards and thinks about what he did and throws up in the trash can because he realizes how close he was to hurting himself, potentially getting shot down, all these things. And he told me, this is important, he says, even all these years later, I wake up in a cold sweat. All these years later, I wake up in a cold sweat. And that's something I've heard many, many times talking to veterans through the years, right? And so, you realize this person who's been through all he's been through and done what he's done to this level, he's no different than a lot of these other veterans in some ways. But there's more to that story, and I'll get to that in a second. And so it's impactful. And so I got sent back over there to talk to him the week before the ceremony. And same thing, I'm asking questions, trying to figure out what I haven't heard, what I need to know. And he mentions getting shot down. I said, well, tell me that story. And he said, well, I got shot down 5 times. Well, what happens when you get shot down? Well, when you shoot the helicopter, most of the time it's going to spin. And so when you're spinning and you know you haven't hit the ground yet, but you know you're probably pretty close to hitting the ground, if you got any rockets or minigun ammunition, you let it all go as much as you can at the end. Therefore, before you hit the ground, you're spinning and you're shooting rockets in every direction around you. If anybody's waiting for you in the bushes, do you have some room? And he said one time he got shot down. He was with this guy he'd never flown with before, brand new co-pilot, and they hit the ground and it all settles. And the guy says, what do we do now? And he goes, we run. And so they get out of the helicopter and they run to the tree line and they hide. And he said every time he got shot down, those rangers that he was going and helping every night would come and find him in the brush and get him back to his base camp. And that's the part of the story that's like, I see this now, right? You did that stuff. It was your job. You would ask him, why'd you do that mission? Why'd you do that on June 18th, 68? Because it needed doing, is what he would say. And that's obviously a big part of it. But they relied on each other, right? I'm going to come save you. And if I get shot down, you come save me. And there's a piece of being vulnerable with that, right? I need you. You need me. We're in this together. And when we think about, I remember playing high school football, right? And I played a lot of positions, but I remember being the fullback, right? And so we had a play called 16 lead, right? Which was all of that means something. The 1 means the tailback's getting the ball. The 6 means you're going to the 6 gap, which is right outside the tackle, between the tackle and the tight end, because the gaps on the right are even and the gaps on the left are odd. And so on this play, the line pushes everybody this way, and the tight end that's on the defensive end lets him go free and goes to block the linebacker. So what you should have is everybody cleared out and 1 man just standing in there by himself, and it's my job to hit him and knock him that way so the running back can get through, right? If I fall down, if I miss that man, the running back's going to get hit in the mouth, and that's not good. He's counting on me to do that. Combat is, I don't know, 100 times X that, right? But still, those guys I played football with, if I saw them tomorrow, 30 years ago we played together, it would be like yesterday. And that's happened, because you have that bond. And needing each other, man, that's that bond that's really hard when you break these guys apart and you send them out after their combat tour, send them home, they struggle with. That person they're used to needing, and they need you as well. That's missing. And that's one of the hard things with all the mental health, suicide crisis, all this stuff. I talked to a man named Ernie Savage who was in the Battle of Yadrang, which was the first full-scale U.S. Army battle in Vietnam. And I asked him about that, mental health stuff. And he said, well, I was a career Army person, so I went back to Fort Benning, and that's just where I stayed. He said, so I had some things, but nothing that was that bad because I never left. I was around my guys all the time. And that's one of the things, right? If you can be around your people, how that helps. And that's what I saw with this group with Larry Taylor, right? They from this mission of trying to get this Medal of Honor, Dave Hill said it was the one thing in his career that never was finished. It was incomplete. One thing that he had to do. And these guys, it was like full-time jobs. It was Dave Hill, a couple guys in town, Carl Poston, Mike Holden, who passed away in October, General Range, General Bell. Some of these guys, they really worked, to get all this to happen. Because they knew that it could happen. They started to see guys, receive the Medal of Honor, from Vietnam years and years later. And so they really, knew that this was a possibility. And so that's really what made them work so hard at all this. And another piece of that idea, I'm looking for where I was in my talk here. Okay. I don't know where it was. That mental health piece, right, is important to think about in the context of the way we treat veterans today. Like we talked about, post-Vietnam, and I know people who were, my grandmother for one, who was alive and was an adult in that era. It's hard for her to think about because she saw all those things. And when I joined the Marine Corps, I didn't tell anybody. I knew if I told anyone, they'd try to talk me out of it, and I didn't want to be talked out of it. I knew what I wanted to do, and so it's hard to think about some of those things because it has been challenging. But the way veterans are treated in this country, even today, even though there is more respect than there was in that era, it's not like it was post-World War II, say. You know, from 53 to 92, every president had military background, prior military, were veterans. Since then, only one has had military service. Same thing for Congress. Those numbers have dropped a lot. Like did the military get worse at training leaders? No, they didn't. Our society has changed how they look at it, right? And so I think that is a big thing. And I sit at an interesting, point in our society as a journalist and a veteran, because I think when people approach people, right, they think of them in categories. They make up their mind who you are based on, these things in your life. And it's important for us to push back on these ideas, right? Because the reason we tell these stories at Channel 9 is because you never know how this story is different than the next story. And they're all different. And you don't know how the story's going to end. And you really don't. And that brings you back to the Larry Taylor story where he said, I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. And I think in my head, well, I've heard this story a lot of times. I know what he's saying. And then a beat later he says, and then I tell myself, you don't know how lucky you are. And that's a different ending to that story. Doesn't mean he doesn't struggle. I mean, he does. He clearly does. There are so many versions of that of, my wife sleeps in the other room, or I don't go to sleep at night because I'm afraid of what's going to be there when I go to sleep. But Larry Taylor thinks of it as, I don't know how lucky, you don't know how lucky you are because he survived all that stuff. And he made it home, and he's had a remarkable life. And he's struggling today with some health issues, but he's as funny and as strong as anybody you want to meet. And if you get a chance to shake his hand, I encourage you to do it because he's an awesome human being. So thanks for letting me be here today. I appreciate it. I appreciate all you for listening to me ramble on today. And if you have any questions, we can talk afterwards. But I just appreciate you. And if you got a veteran in your life on Saturday or before Saturday, hug their neck. Appreciate them because it's even if you're not fighting a war, your sacrifice matters. You could be at home not getting hit in the face with that gas mask, right? You could choose not to do that, it changes people's lives on so many levels of just getting out of your hometown and seeing somebody, something that's different, experiencing other cultures. I remember when I was in the reserves, I did an anti-drug operation in the Caribbean, and my job wasn't hard. I guarded the helicopter at night. And they had these Caribbean forces. We were on an anti-drug operation, so the Caribbean government wanted us to go in and help them get rid of their marijuana fields because there were people who would go up to the tourists on the beaches and try to sell them marijuana. And so they wanted us to come in there and try to help them eradicate it. And so I would watch the helicopter, and then one week they came to us and said, we're going to give you some help, and it's going to be a soldier from the Caribbean forces. And I'll end on this. And this guy comes up, and I'm a Marine, right? My uniform looks good. I've got my creases, and my boots are shined, and I'm ready to go. But we're guarding it all night long. And this guy comes up, and his shirt doesn't match his pants, and he looks kind of disheveled. And so I take the first shift, and I go to where he's sitting, thinking he's going to be asleep. And he's sitting up in a chair, back as straight as a board, waiting for his turn to guard the helicopter. And it's like 3 in the morning, so I come in, and I got my head down, just exhausted, and he said, why are you hanging your head? And I said, I'm just tired, I'm good, don't worry about it. And he goes, fatigue will go away, but you have to carry yourself with respect because nobody else is going to if you don't. And it was one of those things of like, I judged this person based on his uniform, and he's teaching me a lesson, about how you carry yourself. And thinking, I already knew that. I already knew how to carry myself. I'm a Marine. I know how to carry myself, right? But it's like, well, maybe you should be open-minded about that and think about, what you can learn from those folks around you, because it really is important. So those veterans in your life, they're special people, and we need to understand that better in our society. Have a great day. Have a great Veterans Day as well.